I never should have stepped inside that tunnel. From the first breath, the air felt wrong, thick, metallic, as though the walls themselves were exhaling after decades of silence. My torch beam sliced through the black, and in that beam the dust swirled like something alive. Every crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoed too loudly, as if the tunnel wanted me to know I wasn't welcome. They said this place was sealed in 1944, abandoned after a firestorm swallowed a supply train inside. For 80 years, no one entered. They told us it was just rusted steel and forgotten stone. But as soon as I saw the gate, patched clumsily with fresh chain and broken boards, I knew someone or something had tried to get out. The deeper I walked, the more it felt less like a tunnel and more like a throat. Each step carried me into a body long dead but not at rest. And then I saw it, just at the edge of the light. A figure dragging itself from behind the wreckage, skin blistered, patchy, like it had torn flesh from others and stitched it across its own frame. I froze. It turned its head. And I understood. This tunnel was never empty. It was waiting. And the worst part? I wasn't alone. I'd brought someone with me. I've always preferred working alone. People think it's because I'm quiet or awkward, or maybe just unfriendly. The truth is simpler. I don't like distractions. When you're crawling through derelict tunnels and forgotten shafts, distractions get you hurt, or worse. That morning they assigned me a partner anyway. His name was Dan. Barely out of his 20s, earbuds dangling, always with some story about fights he'd streamed the night before. Not exactly my type, but orders were orders. Together, we were sent to survey the South Cut Tunnel, an old line buried under sheets of history and neglect. Our job was basic. Check the structure, log debris, and determine if it was safe enough to repurpose for public access. From the outside, the tunnel didn't look like much. Overgrown fencing, rusted padlocks, a crude timber wall meant to keep out trespassers. But what caught my attention wasn't how it looked, it was the repairs. The fence had been cut once, then patched up hastily, as though someone had already tried to force their way through. The boards bent outward, not inward. It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about keeping something inside. Dan joked as we clipped on our respirators. "Place looks like a horror movie set," he muttered, pretending to shiver. I didn't laugh. The truth is he wasn't wrong. The archway loomed like the open jaws of some ancient beast, teeth of iron and brick waiting to close. Inside, the air was damp, sour with age. Even through the mask, I tasted copper, as if the tunnel had been bleeding all this time. We walked slowly, our torches casting long, trembling shadows on the curved walls. Every 30 yards or so, a refuge bay yawned out of the stone, small alcoves where workers once hid from passing trains. I counted them automatically, one after another, like stepping stones across a river of darkness. Dan filled the silence with chatter about featherweight bouts and flashy knockouts. I half listened, grateful for the noise. Anything was better than the silence pressing down thick as earth above our heads. Yet beneath his words, I kept hearing things. Tiny metallic clicks, faint shifts in gravel. The kind of noises tunnels shouldn't make unless someone else is walking behind you. We passed broken ceiling plates, bolts dangling like teeth ready to fall. Piles of brick lay scattered across the floor, some fresh, some decades old. And then we began finding scraps of fabric, oily and blackened, pressed into the gravel. One piece clung stubbornly beneath a rusted bolt. Dan crouched to examine it. "Weird texture," he said, tugging it free. "Feels tougher than cloth." I told him it was probably from an old uniform, sealed in when they closed the line. I didn't believe my own words. The fibers were stiff, stretched, almost like skin dried hard with time.
We logged the section and moved on. But my mind kept circling back to that fragment. I couldn't shake the thought that we weren't the first ones in here since the war. And if we weren't, then what exactly had been left behind all this time? That question still haunted me when we stumbled on the wreck. The wreck appeared after the 8th refuge bay. At first, it was just a glint of twisted steel, but when my torch swept across it, my heart stopped. Half melted into the rails was a freight wagon, the skeleton of a train left to rot in darkness. Its siding was peeled back like the lid of a tin, rust corroding every inch. What remained looked less like machinery and more like a carcass. I should have admired it the way I usually do with wartime relics. Instead, I felt sick. My torchlight caught on strange details fused into the wreck, burned boots half buried under wheels, shreds of fabric melted into rivets, the faint shape of something once human scorched onto the steel. And then the gravel shifted. I froze, being locked forward. At first I thought it was debris collapsing, but in the corner of the light, a figure dragged itself out from behind the wreckage. It moved wrong, jerky, broken, like bones grinding against stone. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "This area's dangerous. You need to leave." The figure shambled closer. That was when the light revealed its surface. Not clothes, not even flesh in the way flesh should be. It was raw, blistered, and layered with patches of skin torn from elsewhere, clinging like wet rags. An armpit, a slice of thigh, a torso pressed haphazardly against its own. I stumbled back, dropping my torch. The beam rolled across the gravel, landing squarely on the thing. It lifted its head. Where eyes should have been were pits of leaking red tissue. Its jaw opened like it never learned how to speak, only how to scream. The sound that followed wasn't human. It rattled through the tunnel, vibrating in the rails beneath my boots. Every instinct in me screamed to run. I bolted for the nearest bay, heart thundering, lungs fighting through the mask. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't abandoned history. It was still alive, and it had been waiting for someone to open the gate. I crouched in the refuge bay, lungs burning as I tried to silence my breath. The torch beam lay several feet away, fixed on the creature. In that light, I saw it struggle. Its legs were tangled in steel cabling fused to its flesh, as if the fire had melted metal into muscle. Each pull carved wet gouges into its body, but it didn't stop. It only jerked forward harder, screaming in frustration. Relief washed through me. The cables kept it pinned, but the sound of its thrashing made every nerve in me crawl. Then my radio hissed. "Southcut Control?" A voice crackled, ancient, distorted. "Enemy overhead. Brace for impact." Static followed. I stared at the radio clipped to my chest. That wasn't today's signal. It sounded like something still transmitting from the war. The creature reacted instantly. It threw itself forward with a howl that split the air, flesh tearing as it fought the cables. I grabbed the torch and ran, boots slipping on the ballast. Dan's voice suddenly came through, ragged and terrified. "Callum, mate, something's here. I can't." "Stay where you are," I shouted, fumbling for the radio. "Don't move, I'm coming back." But the signal dissolved into static. I sprinted, counting bays as I passed, praying I wasn't too late. I caught his tool bag, lying abandoned on the ground. Beyond it, a narrow maintenance tunnel branched into shadow. My stomach dropped. "Dan!" I called, stepping inside. He was hunched against the far wall, his shoulders twitching like he was about to vomit. His breathing came in short, shallow rasps. I rushed closer, desperate to pull him out. Then I saw his back.
The skin along his spine was stretched, torn, shifting unnaturally beneath the fabric of his vest. His proportions were wrong, arms too long, shoulders too broad. He turned, slowly, fluidly, and where Dan's face should have been, the thing smiled through him. I bolted. The creature, wearing him, lurched after me. Gravel scattered under its steps, irregular and scraping. My torch swung wildly, casting fractured light on soot-stained walls. The gate was ahead, a thin line of mourning. I slammed through, metal rattling as I crashed into daylight. But it followed. It burst against the gate and shrieked as the sun hit its back. Steam rose, skin blistering and sagging. The Dan shape melted, collapsing in violent spasms. It recoiled, dragging itself backward into the tunnel's dark, leaving behind the stink of cooked flesh. I staggered, gasping in the cold morning. For a moment I thought it was over, but the silence pressed differently now, heavy, watching. I couldn't leave, not yet. I closed the gate, snapped the padlock, and stepped back fast. My hands trembled as I told myself it was secure, that it was trapped. But my mind kept circling back to the fabric scraps, to the patched fence, to the way Dan had changed. This wasn't one creature. It was more. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dan's face sliding off, skin sagging like wax. I turned on the TV just to drown it out. A fight replay was on, the same match he'd bragged about. For a second, it almost felt normal. Almost. Then the house groaned. A long, dragging creak, like metal shifting. I muted the screen. Listened. Somewhere deep, almost beneath the floorboards, came the faintest sound of gravel crunching, as though the tunnel hadn't stayed shut, as though something else had already found its way out. Daylight hadn't destroyed it, it had only driven it back. I should have left the lock in place and walked away forever. But by the second night, I couldn't stand the noise anymore. The groans under the floor, the static from the radio that wasn't even plugged in. Every shadow stretched too long. Every silence felt heavy with breath. Something had followed me. So I went back, alone. The dawn was cold when I reached the south cut. Mist hung low across the tracks. My hands shook as I slid the bolt cutters through the chain. The gate clanged open, and the tunnel exhaled. Inside, the dark swallowed me whole. My torch beam trembled across rusted steel, broken bricks, and finally, the wreck. Only this time, the cables were empty. The thing that had been trapped was free. The gravel shifted. I spun just as it lunged from the shadows, taller now, stronger, its body layered with fresh skin. Dan's face still clung half-melted across his jaw, smiling with lips that weren't his.
It struck, claws scraping sparks from the wall. I dove aside, the beam catching its chest, a patchwork of flesh blistering with each breath. It shrieked, the sound shaking dust from the ceiling. I ran, it followed. Every bay I passed, it closed the distance, its limbs jerking at sick angles but impossibly fast. The tunnel shook with its pursuit. My lungs burned, my legs screaming, but I couldn't stop. At the 9th bay, the ceiling groaned. Rusted plates tore free and crashed between us, splitting the path. For a heartbeat, I thought I was safe. Then it ripped through the debris, roaring, relentless. The exit glowed ahead, a thin blade of light. I sprinted, throat raw, heart hammering louder than its footsteps. As I burst into daylight, I spun and hurled the torch. It struck the thing's chest. For a moment, fire bloomed. Its scream split the morning as flames devoured the stolen skin. It staggered back into shadow, thrashing, burning, and then silence. Only smoke curled from the darkness. I collapsed on the gravel, hands clawing at the earth, not sure if I'd won or simply survived another round. Because deep down, I knew I hadn't killed it. I'd only hurt it. I sat there for a long time, hunched on the gravel, lungs burning from smoke and panic. The sun edged higher, bleeding pale gold across the tracks. For a moment, I let myself believe it was finished, that the fire had done what 80 years of steel and stone could not. But the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Eventually, I forced myself to move. My legs shook as I hauled the gate shut again, slamming the padlock into place. The metal was still warm under my hands. I told myself it was secure, that nothing could get through. But deep down, I knew locks and chains meant nothing against something that had already learned to wear us like masks. Back at the site office, I lied. I said there'd been a collapse, that Dan was caught in it, that recovery was impossible without risking more lives. They believed me. Or maybe they wanted to. Nobody wanted to hear that something from the war hadn't stayed buried, that it had been crawling in the dark, waiting for someone to break the seal. That night I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the house made me jolt. Every shadow looked too thick. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps pacing outside my door, slow and deliberate. When I pulled myself to check, there was nothing, just the faint smell of smoke drifting in from nowhere. I had shut the gate, but I hadn't shut it out of me. Things like that don't die. They wait. That's where my story ends. But the silence never really did. It's been weeks since the tunnel and still I hear echoes. Metal clinks in empty rooms. Faint gravel crunching when no one is walking. Sometimes I catch myself staring at my own reflection too long, wondering if the skin I wear is still mine. If you ever find yourself near the South Cut, don't go looking for the sealed gate. And if you hear movement on the other side, don't listen. Don't answer. Because once you've opened the dark, it remembers you, and it never lets you go.